The leader doesn't see the outsized impact they have when they criticize people, that report to them, that they are able to fire and write their paychecks and everything. And so, they send a Slack message to one of their workers on a Saturday, then the worker's going to say, it's like, well, I'm expected to work on the weekends. And so these burnout cultures are insidious.
What does that look like when you're coaching somebody? Somebody is just starting with you. They're like, hey, maybe they're hearing this right now. They're like, oh, I could use a coach on my business. What kind of maybe intake or structure, framework, support does that look like that you offer?
Great. So obviously it depends on the context of what they're going through. It'll be different for someone who's like transitioning from one career to a next, or, has things personally in their life. But generally, and this is what I'm most commonly working with, are leaders that are on a team. I like to work with fast growth leaders that have like just gotten like a big influx of capital, like an investment round, and now they have to scale up their company and encounter a whole bunch of dimensions that scares the crap out of them, right? And so the way that I like to get as much surface area as possible, like with a kickoff assessment, is we have a 360 that we deploy, with an instrument that, involves surveys to key stakeholders. But I also do interview-based 360. So it's just like, okay, put me on the phone with the key people in your life. So if it's a CEO of a venture-backed company, I want to talk to your co-founder. I want to talk to board members, the people that have invested in you. I want to talk to your partner, your wife, or, husband, or whoever that is that's got different intel on you. And then I want to get data from the direct reports. I'll do observation meetings. So I'll sit in, on their leadership team meeting or their board meeting, and I want to see the dynamics that are going on there. And I also do like a dashboard review. So I want to actually see how you relate to the business model. How do you measure success? What is your business model? What's your business plan? Show me your P&L. Like, I want to see how that's going, because all of those things are going to tell me how you orient to the business and where we're going to get, the most ground in the coaching. I'll speak to my clients' therapists. I'll create a therapeutic alliance there so that we know we're working in alignment with each other in those ways. So I try to do as much of that as possible on the front end with a kickoff. And then from there, the coaching is still a one-on-one relationship. And we might do, trainings with teams or things like that ad hoc going on. But that's how I like to kick it off.
What does burnout look like within these founders and teams?
Insidious, celebrated.
Celebrated. Wow.
Well, there's the whole mentality in the startup community that, like, yeah, if you're not sleeping under your desk, you're not doing it right. And in a way, it's easy for me as a consultant to say, it's like, well, that's suboptimal, that there are more optimal ways to engage. That in a way, I would like to say that quality is more important than quantity, but the truth of the matter, it is both, and there's definitely a time when you need to work 7 days a week. Ideally, that doesn't go on for years. There's some startup communities that, like to say it's just, you need to hustle all the time. And like, the business isn't dead until you give up. It's kind of puts all the responsibility on the founder, where I think, my mentors have taught me that if the business model thesis isn't valid, if you've tested that thesis and it's not working out, you kill the business and move on to doing something more productive with your time. And so in a sense, I want to support people. I've coached a lot of people out of the businesses that they are in because it was not sustainable for what they were doing. And so I think this is a really important question today as leaders try to determine for themselves what is optimal performance for themselves and how they model that for their team. Because a lot of leaders are pushed, and I've talked to VCs and investors that say, like, yeah, so this founder, they're responding to me within a day. I need them to be responding to me within an hour. And they'll even say, it's like, it's not so much that I expect them always to be working, but it needs to look like they're always working.
Hmm.
Like that's the mentality in these ecosystems. And so it's understandable and there's all this pressure from the top. Of course, the leader doesn't see the outsized impact they have when they criticize people, that report to them that they are able to fire and write their paychecks and everything. And so, they send a Slack message to one of their workers on a Saturday, then the worker's going to say, it's like, well, I'm expected to work on the weekends.
Mhm.
And so these burnout cultures are insidious. But with a real proper analysis of like, actually, it's like, I like the metaphor of, with your phone or anything that has a battery, you don't want to drain it all the way down to zero. Once it gets down to 15 to 20%, that's when you want to charge it back up. And I think that's apt for ourselves, that we need to really know what our renewal practices, self-care practices are. Like if it's sauna and cold plunge that works for me, then I need to make sure I'm getting to that sauna before I get below 15% of my energy. That
Mhm.
once I'm on the floor, that's going to have negative consequences for the projects that I care about, for everyone around me. It's going to push me back. It's going to regress as opposed to moving things forward. And just one more thing, the last thing I'll say about this is it's unique to every person, right? And I think it's essential for any leader today to understand, obviously, their strengths and weaknesses, but how it shows up in these ways. Like when you're stressed, what do you do? Do you work harder? That's a lot of people I work with, that's all they know. If things are looking dire, well, that just means I need to lean in more.
Mhm.
Well, that's means that that's probably also having negative consequences as well because it's stress oriented.
Mhm.
So knowing how to construct your own relationship to burnout, the user manual for your burnout, how to get yourself out of it and how to coach the people around you to recognize the signals and how to intervene with you effectively.
This podcast is brought to you by B Micro, organic freeze-dried microgreens for easy, natural nutrition. Sprinkle them on any meal and enjoy the benefits. Shop now at bmicro.farm and use code STEVE15 to save. And when somebody does experience burnout, then what happens? How long does burnout last? What happens to their energy? Can they come back? I've known people that seem like it's taken years for them to come back from burnout. And maybe they were operating in burnout for a long time and that made it just much worse. But it seems like if you hit burnout, it's you're like out of the game.
Yeah, I think it's like a lot of illnesses. Someone can get, mold exposure and they don't know that they're allergic to mold for years until all of a sudden their functioning has reached such a deteriorated level that they have to recognize where it's coming from and they get out of that house. And then it takes years for them to recover.
Mm.
And like many, many illnesses like that, it's the same thing
Mm.
of the longer you're exposed to it, the more that it takes recovery. Now, in the cases of burnout, there can be great silver linings there of what you learned. And then, of course, the next career that you step into and like what you're given money to go forward is more successful based on what you've learned. But I think those costs can be limited. They're not necessary to go that deep into it. So, what does it look like? Well, when things start falling apart all around you,
Mm.
your relationships, and when you start ignoring the signals around that, that's when it's happening. And that's when um, finding a way to get out of Dodge, to recover. And I think this is one of the things that's like when I'm recognizing stress and burnout in the people that I work with, so like when was the last time you took a vacation? Well, first we have to define like what does a vacation even look like, right? We've already said it's impossible to get a smartphone out of people's hands. But like, do you actually know how to effectively vacation, right? Do you have KPIs for your recreation? Because
Wow.
recreation, recreate. It's about getting far enough away from the ego project that you can reset. And that's where the creativity comes back in. All of a sudden, I'm getting downloads because I'm an open vessel for what matters. Then I'm inspired, then I'm leaning in, then I want to go back,
Mhm.
as opposed to, you know, alcohol, screens, whatever the ways, if that's just
Yeah.
escapism and numbing out the pain and not getting to the bottom, that's not going to recreate anything.
How important is creativity in leadership?
Well, essential is the easy answer. I mean, obviously there are creative roles that that, by definition require more creativity, and there's like more left brain oriented, for a tech company, usually those are started by an engineer who understands how to take an algorithmic solution and build that out, right? It's kind of like builder mentality.
Mhm.
But that's still very creative, right?
Mhm.
And so creativity, of course, I think is anything. It almost begs the question, like, what isn't creativity?
Hmm.
And in a sense, I guess, if I just need a job and I go get hired into a role and really all I need to do is show up and turn on some form of autopilot, and there's a paycheck there, there's benefits. That's great. That's fine. I think creativity is a little more necessary when we go into more uncertain circumstances, and leadership is rife with that.